Hello and welcome to Cognitations, a podcast about cognitive science and how it can help us explore the wonderful quirks of the mind. Cognitive science is the interdisciplinary study of the mind. It is comprised of cognitive psychology, the neurosciences, linguistics, philosophy, social sciences, computer science, and more. Without further ado, here is today's episode.
Your hosts today are Cindy and Marius.
We rarely stop to think about how we make sense of the sounds around us, how we find voices in a noisy room, or why two people might hear completely different things in the same audio clip. Today's guest explores the hidden mechanisms behind these experiences, how the brain turns raw sound into meaning, how we learn the regularities of the soundscapes around us, and why some people might hear the world so differently. Our guest is Daniel Pressnitzer. He's originally trained in engineering, but he went on to complete a master's degree in acoustics, signal processing, and computer science in Paris. He earned his PhD at Ircam, where he studied auditory perception, focusing on musical consonance and dissonance. He then spent several years in the UK conducting postdoctoral research at the Centre for the Neurobasis of Hearing in Cambridge. In 2000, he returned to France to join the CNRS as a researcher. Now a director of research at CNRS, he's also a founding member and the current head of the Audition team at the École normale supérieure. His research bridges acoustics, perception, and cognition, using carefully crafted illusions and experiments to probe the mid-level processes of hearing, or the ones that shape how we interpret the world around us without us even realizing it. His lab has also developed various techniques and tools to probe the functioning of the auditory system.
Welcome to Cognitation, Daniel.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Daniel, you have a very interdisciplinary background. Could you describe briefly your journey and how you found yourself at the intersection of engineering, cognition, and hearing research?
Yeah, I started with engineering. So I was born and raised in Toulouse, so I did my class prépa. So Toulouse is where Airbus is. So then it seemed quite natural to go for aeronautical engineering, who doesn't like rocket science? And my dad also worked for Airbus. So that was very interesting. And then, had a nice experience as, working as an engineer, thanks to the end of studies, internships and all that. But when I actually graduated, I thought, well, maybe I want to do something a bit different before I actually get, have a serious job and serious life and everything. And it turned out that they had just opened, something had just opened in Paris. So this master's you mentioned, Cindy, so the acoustique, traitement de signal et informatique appliqué à la musique. So this was the first year the program started. It was at Ircam. I was very interested in music, so I thought, well, that sounds like fun, right? So I went there without too many expectations. And there I discovered, a first taste of really what interdisciplinarity means. And in particular, so there were classes by Stephen McAdams, who I would go on and do my PhD with. And he was really, still is, I'm sure, a wonderful teacher. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. You can actually apply scientific, rigorous methods to really cool questions like, what makes music consonant or dissonant? So that's what I did during my PhD with him. And then, as you mentioned, I moved for a postdoc to Cambridge. So there, that was also, I guess, unexpected and different. So I started working with Roy Patterson, who is famous for many things, but also for being a modeler. So maybe I can mention that, so it will give heart to people who think, So I think he hired me because I knew how to, do very geeky things with MATLAB, not necessarily for the science. But then when I was in Cambridge, it really was an amazing experience because he had also just founded the Centre for the Neural Basis of Hearing. So we had people doing modeling, doing perceptual experiments, and also doing actual neurophysiology in the same, on the same floor of the University of Cambridge. And this is where I met Ian Winter, who then hired me for a second postdoc doing actual neurophysiology. And I have to say that these 2 years really opened my eyes on what it means to ask hopefully interesting questions, and then take whatever means it takes to try and answer them. And you can do that with as much rigor as you want. There are ways to apply scientific methods to questions about the human mind, which is amazing, right? So yeah, I guess that's mostly it. And then when I returned to Paris, I first returned to Ircam, working with Steve, and then we started this lab in École normale. And I guess it's fair to say that we really tried to recreate a bit what we had in Cambridge. So together with Alain de Chevigny and Christian Lorenzi, who are also regulars in Cambridge, we did try to have on the same floor of the in Rue d'Ulm, psychophysics, modeling, physiology, all these things. So I think this is really an exciting way to approach things.
Yeah, I remember you were talking about the very early days of starting the Laboratoire des Systèmes Perceptifs. You were one of the pioneers, and you were saying you were inviting all these people to lunch, and you had yellow eyes, yellow skin, all because of all the cholesterol you were eating.
Well, that's Christian's anecdote, yeah, but I think it's not far from the truth. I mean, yeah, starting a lab is really exciting. So, if you guys have an opportunity to do that, it's really something, because you get to try to build something which has what it takes for you to do what you want to do. That's very convoluted. But yeah, as you say, what we did was invite our friends and create some kind of a seminar series, which was really, really, really nice. So we had this new ideas in hearing thing, where we invited, our friends, all people we had not met before, but who we thought would bring some new ideas to the mix. And I think that really launched the lab for us, yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at the lab today, there's so many different interests and research goals. And so was it hard in the beginning to define and then the kind of identity for the lab? And
well, I think the key point was we didn't define it identity. So what made it exciting, as I think happens most of the time when you create a new lab, is it was very precarious, right? We had no idea. I mean, when we started that, we were completely ignorant of what it takes to actually build a lab. But we thought, this is a really nice place to be, École normale, and we have nice people. So, let's just do it and try to get as many different expertise in the building as we can. But, even now, I think some themes do emerge across people, but it's definitely bottom up. There's no, spiritual guide of the lab saying this is what we should work on now. So it's very much emerging from the interaction between all these different peoples and different interests.
And if I can ask, what were some of the challenges or hurdles that you faced in the very early days?
Well, there were very practical challenges. I mean, the building was basically derelict, so it was a new bit that the École normale reinvested when we arrived. So we were kind of the first people in the building with a couple of other labs. The Département d'études cognitives was also being created, so it was created a few years before we arrived, but there were no people on site. So it was just, dealing with changing light bulbs, painting the walls, and at the same time trying to do good science. So, but that was really nice. And I think the precarious aspect was important. It made you, happy to go to the lab and solve these very practical and then more scientific issues every day.
So let's jump in a little bit about your research and what you've been doing in this lab that you built from the ground up. And I just wanted to start with a very basic overview for our listeners about how the auditory system works and more in general, how people hear. And we think we're usually pretty good at picking out voices in the noisy room. In a cocktail party, for example, you always hear your name from the other side of the room. We can also follow melodies and complex pieces of music. And when we talk to people with different sorts of accents, we can still understand them. But actually, many of these tasks are quite challenging for machines. And could you explain why this is the case, that auditory stimuli are so challenging to process?
Yeah, so it's very interesting and very broad question. So why is it hard? So first, maybe I should say that this is how I used to start my classes. Look, we do all these amazing things with our brains and ears, and machines, are just terrible at that. I'm not sure I can say that for much longer. So, there have been really impressive progress in the last 5 years. But what's true is I think it's harder for for everyone to actually grasp how hearing works, because I think one particularity of hearing is that it takes place in time, right? So if you see something, it's usually there for a little while, so you can go and grasp information, and your retina kind of maps like neurons, like bits of the visual space. And for some reason, it's not too hard to try to understand that for the general audience. For hearing, it's very different, because the way the whole thing is set up, at least initially, the main dimension is related to time. It's frequency. So frequency is how a sound will repeat itself, if it repeats itself. And basically, neurons in your auditory nerve, so the first part of your brain where there's actually neural information about sound, they will like some frequencies and don't like others. So it's actually hard to grasp, right? And the other challenge is it's really fast. So when we're talking, we have maybe what acousticians call fundamental frequencies of about 100 to 200 hertz. But then there are many what we call harmonics, so other frequencies in our voices, which can go easily to 2000 hertz or something. And you have to deal with that with the information currency of the brain, which is neural spikes. And a neural spike lasts for 1 millisecond. So maximum, which is never reached, the maximum frequency you could code with spikes, one per period, would be 1000 hertz. So there has to be some stuff happening for your brain to be able to deal with information contained in sound. And I think that's what makes it slightly different from vision, for instance, which is by far the most studied sense. You have to deal with time. Yeah.
And you also have to decode what the different stream of sounds,
Yes.
identify the cause of, because what you hear is just one wave of
Yes,
sound, right?
that's a very good point. So in vision again, so it's usually the case, except if you have transparency, that one point in space belongs to one object.
Yeah.
So then you have to sort out which point belongs to well, maybe you don't do that, but conceptually you could do that. With hearing, it's as is everything was completely transparent. So you don't code space in your peripheral auditory system. You code frequency, and two different people will have the same frequencies in their voices. Or maybe, if you're in a busy restaurant or party, the components of your voice will completely mix with the components of the background noise. So indeed, it is one of the main challenges to be able to focus, if you want, on the person talking to you, or if you want, on the table behind you, or if you want, on the solo performer on an orchestra, or if you're the conductor, maybe on the guy singing slightly out of tune in the back. So and this we can do, even though everything enters your ear as one huge mixture of transparent objects. Yeah.
Maybe it will be nice for the neuroscientists in our audience, including me. Maybe can you give us a brief tour of from the ear to the auditory cortex? What happened when you hear the sound wave? What's the next step?
Okay, so very succinctly, as I said, the organizing principle is frequency. So in the brain you have billions of neurons, and one way to think of what they're doing is some neurons are selective to some features of the environment. They will respond, they will produce action potentials if what's happening outside has some feature. Imagine I'm a neuron, I like 1000 hertz. Well, if the sound that comes to the ear contains 1000 hertz, I will fire. And if it does not, I will fire less or not at all. So this is how it's set up from the outset. So before actually having spikes, you have an amazing sensor, so the cochlea, which is a biomechanical sensor with, it's still, an active field of research. We have no full understanding of how it works. with feed-forward, feedback, nonlinear processes, all kinds of really fancy stuff to try to analyze the sound in different frequency bands. And then this is preserved up to at least the first cortical area, so the most evolved part of your brain. So this is where basically we believe higher level analysis is being done, interaction with the other senses. And another really important thing is, unlike for vision, I'm not picking on vision because, but just as a contrast. So in vision, you have the retina, and then you have like the optic nerve, a cable that goes to one important processing center, the thalamus, and then the cortex. But it's pretty fast. In hearing, you don't have that. So you need to go through a whole lot of subcortical structures. So people call them relays, but I don't think it makes much sense because, if you want to have a long cable, and you can, you have nerves which are really long. So it's not you don't need to amplify the signal. You just need to process it. And in hearing, what's really striking is right after the auditory nerve, you go to a structure called the cochlear nucleus. So that's where I worked with Ian Winter during my postdoc. And already there, you have a whole lot of different sub-processing happening. It's like, you have this signal, which is really fast. And then you take a look at it from many different angles. So you have a variety of neurons, variety of responses. And then this goes on, and I think it takes about, for the main pathway, 7 synapses to go from the auditory nerve to the cortex. So there's a lot happening. And just to simplify, what may be happening is we're trying to slow down the information. So we're looking at the signal in many different ways, and we try to recast the information on a time scale that's more compatible with like the other senses. That's one possibility.
And just out of curiosity, there's bats and dogs and all of these animals that seem to hear better than us. So why is that? And is there a reason that our hearing system has the limitations that it does?
Well, I'm not sure if we can say they hear better than us. Their hearing is adapted to their ecological niche. Like if you're a bat, your hearing is not necessarily to chat with your bat friends. It's actually to get a spatial picture of the world by the process we call echolocation. So they will produce some really high frequency sounds because if you have a high frequency, you can focus that in space. And then whatever comes back tells them if there's an obstacle to avoid or prey that they may be able to chase. So their hearing is really, really impressive. And it's been a model for investigations on hearing, but their quote-unquote auditory world probably feels very different from ours. I mean, that's this famous philosophy paper, what is it like to be a bat? We have no idea of knowing. But their hearing serves a very specific purpose, which is giving them a spatial picture of the world. So I guess there probably will be evolutionary pressures that match hearing range to whatever you have to do with your hearing. And humans are probably auditory generalists. So we can do a lot of things with our ears. We can communicate, we can detect danger, maybe a predator approaching or something like that. We can make music. So we can do a lot of different things. So
Yeah, that was actually my next question because, humans, I think what makes the hearing system so special is not necessarily that you can detect a lot of things, but that you can make sense out of it and detect a lot of patterns in a very complex stimuli. And so we hear a lot about neuroplasticity these days, which seems to play a role in making sense of the world. And can you explain what scientists mean when they say neuroplasticity and how can it help in this case?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is, this has been for a while, but this is really a central part of what we think we understand about how brains work. A very broad definition would be neuroplasticity or plasticity is brains changing themselves depending on the stuff they do. So this is very broad, right? So obviously you have that when you grow up during development. The brain structure changes a lot. But we now know that this happens, during the whole lifetime. Even as adults, you have a lot of plasticity going on. So you don't have new neurons, not in any sizable number growing. So this is not how the brain changes itself. However, what the brain can do is to change the connection between neurons. So do you want me to expand on that, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So that's another really striking things about the nervous system. So as I said, I guess the most studied, at least, currency of information in the brain are neural spikes. So it's like an electrical signal that goes from neuron to neuron, and the neuron may broadcast a spike to many neurons or a few neurons, and one neuron may receive spiking information from many neurons. But in fact, it's not as simple as that. So what happens is every time a neuron talks to another neuron, the electrical information gets converted to chemical information at a point which is called the synapse. And this is weird. Why not have just a very intricate network of electrically connected neurons if they're going to talk to each other with spikes? And I didn't design the system, so I don't know if it's actually the case. But what this allows is you can actually change dynamically this connection between neurons. So maybe one neuron wants to, I'm anthropomorphizing neurons here, but to talk more loudly to another neuron, so they will increase the strength of the synapse between the two neurons, or silence some synapse, and all this is happening a lot, most of the time. So this introduces a very flexible way to actually change the dynamics of your billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of connections between neurons, just by changing a tiny bit or sizably the connection between neurons. You completely change the operating mode of the system. And I guess this is what you would call plasticity. And some of these changes can be really short-lived. Some of them get reinforced and then really change the structure of your network. And for instance, I can ask you what you had for breakfast this morning. So, you probably can remember that. So it's somewhere in your brain. If you can remember it, it's in your brain. I can ask you to remember, last time you were on the beach, maybe. Well, that comes to mind. So all that was somehow hidden in neural connections in your brain. And this happened even though you didn't, you probably didn't expect me to have this little quiz about your breakfast, but still, it was there. So, yeah, we think it's a really pervasive property of brains, and a very critical thing to study if you want to understand normal hearing and also atypical hearing.
So just a clarification question. I'm not a specialist at all in neuroscience. So what's the type of neuroplasticity that you are describing? Is it more like adult neuroplasticity? Because I guess like when you look at developmental psychology, how children learn languages, they can detect pattern of language, like they can detect difference in pronunciation very finely, in a very fine-grained manner, and they lose a bit this ability when they grow up. And as an adult, like if you want to learn a different language that use like difference in tone, where it's very important, like I'm a French speaker, and if I want to learn Chinese, it would be way more difficult if I was born in China. So and another example of neuroplasticity will be in adult when we listen to a song several times. Like it's way more easier to process, and when we listen to a new music, like we need a few hearing before really enjoying the music. So is it different type of neuroplasticity?
So I'm definitely thinking of adults and their plasticity. This is the kind of thing we've been studying. I know very little about development, but yes, indeed, there are what people call critical periods. So for instance, although it's been recently challenged, I think, Cindy, you have absolute pitch, right? So the ability of some musicians to just, give the name of a note or any sound basically that just happens around them. And this either you acquire it probably without trying when you're a kid, probably around before 6-7 years of age, or it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to acquire as an adult. So there are different mechanisms between development and adult plasticity. So I focus really on adult observers. And one thing that's, I think, striking to me at least is there's a huge amount of plasticity as an adult. So of course we know that kids have incredible abilities to learn new things, new languages, music. But even as an adult, you have a lot of plasticity happening. And the breakfast example is one example. I mean, I guess, that one point is you remember, or something is there in your brain potentially to remember much more than what you remember.
So I guess for the auditory world, it's just the ability to recognize patterns in music and separate streams and examples like that. Am I right?
Yeah, so the connection is maybe a bit indirect, but yes. So Marius, you said in your question, when you listen to a piece of music more than once, something changes. And it's exactly the kind of thing we've been studying in the lab. So indeed, one thing we've definitely observed over and over again is that repeat has a huge power. So if you repeat music, if you repeat even, crazy things like noise, this is the kind of stuff we've been using, a sound which has no meaning, no structure, the most, the highest entropy you can get with an auditory signal. If you simply repeat it, somehow the listener will change something in their auditory system, and there'll be some plasticity process and memory process happening. So to be able to isolate one target signal from noise, I think one of the keys is you have to kind of know what the target signal should look like. So you have to be able to distinguish that this is probably a vocal component. Oh, actually, I also know the timbre of the voice of this person. So I know, they're not going to speak this way. So a lot of things. As soon as you start talking with someone, you get a lot of statistical regularities. And thankfully, you don't have to think about them. But your auditory system is able to make use of this kind of fast, rapid plasticity, rapid learning to guide your exploration of the auditory scene. I think that's really key, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think that gives a really good introductory picture of how the auditory system works. And it's interesting to see that the process is not passive at all, and it takes a lot of energy and training to kind of get the information we want out of the stimulus.
In a way, yes. So it definitely does, but it doesn't feel like that. That's the other thing which is tricky. So, most people don't, as you said in your introduction, you just open your ears, so to speak, and you hear, what's the big deal? But in fact, as you say, it's a very dynamic, very inquisitive process. So you don't know you're doing all this, of course. But yes, you're always trying to make predictions, trying to match that to what you have in store somewhere in your brain, in memory. So it's indeed a very dynamic process.
Yeah. And it's all happening backstage, kind of under the hood, which is super cool.
Yes.
So let's transition a little bit to kind of inter-individual differences, because we see that the brain needs to infer what's happening, and the sensory information is always a little bit noisy, and this leads to some cases of ambiguity where different people might hear different things even if they're listening to the same stimulus. So auditory illusions are a perfect example of a situation where the inferences that our brain makes are often, which are often unconscious, are different from person to person. And so we wanted to dig a little bit into that to find out why that is. And you yourself have studied a lot of auditory illusions. And a few years ago, we heard the Yanni and Laurel illusion, which became totally viral on social media. You wrote a paper on this, and you have some hypotheses, but let's first listen to what this sounds like, and so our listeners can kind of take their own guess on what the stimulus is.
Okay. Do you want me to play some example? So this is what the original clip sounded like.
Yearly.
So this was very. So the story is this is like a high school student who had a homework assignment to do. She looked online on a dictionary online the definition of whatever word, and then recorded the sound of so the dictionary had some sound examples, and then with her phone, like probably on her poor equipment, but when she played it back, she heard a completely different word, right? Then she got to talk to her classmates, and then someone posted it on, I think it was on Reddit. And then it became, as you said, completely viral. People started to, what? And the two things people heard was either they heard Laurel or they heard Yanni. So I'll play it again.
Yanni. Yanni.
So I don't know what you hear.
I heard Yanni.
Okay.
I hear Laurel.
Ah,
And it's impossible for me to
Perfect.
imagine
Yeah.
that someone is hearing Yanni.
Exactly. That is precisely the point. So people were, they thought, you must be, you look like a normal human being. Get 2 years, yeah? And you hear something completely different. You have no idea this can happen. And yet this happens. And then people started, discussions online and all that. We had actually an analysis of a Twitter thread at the time. I was showing people expressing disbelief just as you expressed.
And I think in your analysis, if I remember correctly, you say that most people are locked in only one perception, and there are some that can hear both. But it's striking that it's like the dress visual illusion where people are locked and they cannot hear.
It's an interesting question. So we try to address that together with Paul Aigret, who's a philosopher at Institut École. Yes, so it's a case of ambiguity. So that's a word we'll now probably use a few more times when we talk about illusion. So the sound is ambiguous. You can hear two things. And in some cases, the ambiguity is very clear. So I don't know if you know the Necker cube, this wired drawing of a cube in 3D, which you can see coming towards you or recessing. So this is ambiguous, but when you know the Necker cube, you can kind of imagine why people would see two different things. This is ambiguous, but for some reason, people don't seem to realize actually, you can hear completely different stuff with the same sound. So I can try to make you, I'm not sure it will work because some people are completely locked. Some people are more amenable to, but what we did in the experiment we designed for this stimulus was try to bias a bit one interpretation or the other. So I'll play a series of transformed version of the original clip, Laurel Yanni, starting with something which would bias you towards Laurel. So, Cindy, let's see. And then moving towards Yanni.
Yanni. Yanni. Yanni. Yanni. Yanni. Yanni. Yanni. Yanni.
I don't know if it changed for you or not.
No.
Oh, for me, the first four were Laurel.
Okay.
But it's strange because at some point I could hear both
Okay.
at the transition point.
So a lot of context effects here, of course. Yeah. So yeah, in our sample, we had, I don't know, 300 plus people. There were like 1/3 who changed perception, depending on the manipulation, and then 1/3 who were completely locked in one interpretation. So you were locked in Laurel.
Yeah, I
in
was
the experiment, we had maybe half an hour of people pressing the button. It was right when all this online controversy was happening, so everybody knew about this. And these poor souls, were just saying, no, I hear Laurel. I still hear Laurel for half an hour. But, they couldn't help it. They just heard one thing. But then we had another third who just said Yanni all the time. So, and for the exact same sounds again.
So what was the manipulation you made for...
Okay, so the hypothesis we had was that the original clip was ambiguous, but if you focused on the low frequencies, it was more compatible with the word Laurel. And if you focus on the high frequencies, it was more compatible with the word Yanni. So we simply removed the high frequencies to try and have you hear Laurel. So that would be this. And we moved or attenuate the low frequencies to try and have you hear Yanni. And, as I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But this was the hypothesis. And then our hypothesis for the fully ambiguous case is without you knowing, maybe you put more perceptual weights to the high frequencies and then you heard Yanni, or more perceptual weight to the low frequencies and then you heard Laurel. That was the idea.
So basically, everyone has a different auditory profile, if you can call it that.
Yes, yeah. So there are a lot of possibilities for that. The simplest one is, it's just a peripheral thing. Maybe we know that, when you have hearing loss or when you age, you lose some sensitivity to the high frequencies. So we already know that, people hear a bit differently, and this is in fact exactly how we try to detect hearing impairment. So we have you try to detect very faint sounds, and depending on how well you do on the different frequencies, we tell you whether you should probably consider a hearing aid or not. What we think is happening because of subsequent experiments is this is not a threshold thing. This is really supra-threshold, above threshold. And I think the word profile is a good word. So it's like you have a style of hearing which kind of makes you give more weight to some frequency range compared to your neighbor. And this loops back to the plasticity thing. So the full picture, at least as we are trying to explore it, is okay. So now we've done. It's been like I think 15 years since we published the first rapid plasticity paper. A lot of experiments showing that whenever you hear something, especially if there are repetitions, you kind of change your auditory system. But then not two people will hear the same thing throughout their life. So if it's cumulative, you would expect that you have slightly different ways to emphasize different frequencies in the auditory spectrum. And then this may explain these kind of illusions where you have no idea why, but you grew up, I guess, in different countries. Maybe you don't listen to the same music. Your friends have different voices. I don't know. But as a result, for the very same sounds, you probably tended to emphasize more the low frequencies, Marius, and you tried to emphasize. You didn't try; it just happened. The high frequencies were more salient to you. That's kind of the working hypothesis.
But so theoretically, I can go back to if it's not hearing loss, I can try to listen to high frequency sounds, and
it's a good point. So it's something we want to do in a current grant. So there have been famous experiments in psychology where you give people prismatic lenses so they see the world upside down or right, left, reversed. And bizarrely, at least for the early examples where people were crazy enough to ride a bicycle with those glasses, seemed to kind of work. So yeah, we'd like to do something similar. So maybe if you were to wear the equivalent of these weird glasses, so things which change the balance of high and low frequencies for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe we can measure changes in your profile. And why would we do this? Well, this is obviously really fun. But also, this could be part of what people call hidden hearing loss. So when people have hearing impairments, the thing we know how to measure is this threshold thing. It's hard, for reasons we can discuss, it's hard to fully compensate, but we can do quite impressive things trying to compensate for threshold performance. And still, very often, people complain that, I hear, but when it's a voice in noise, I'm lost. Or some people don't even have abnormal thresholds, and they still complain they can't really follow conversations in noise. So maybe this is part of the explanation. So imagine for some reason there's a sweet spot of frequencies to emphasize to have good speech and noise perception. If some person has the wrong spots, maybe it's detrimental to their speech and noise perception. So if that's the case, and if we can change that by having them wear these fancy earplugs, then that would be a very direct application of what we do. Yeah.
And I just wanted to go back to another type of auditory illusion that you play at the lab all the time. And
Sorry.
we're in the same office, so sometimes I'm traumatized when I hear this. But it's called the shepherd tone, and again, it's something that people are convinced it's either one or the other. So could you play that and explain what it is?
Yes. So The shepherd tones are spatially very different. So I can play them and then just ask you the question. So it's two tones, like two musical notes. And your job is to try to figure out whether you think the pitch is going up between the two tones, like doot doot, or is it going down, like doot doot. Okay?
I think it's going up.
Yeah,
Okay.
same.
Now you're in agreement. But across the population, you will find that just like Laurel Yanni, just like the dress, in fact, it's the same kind of idea. Two people with no obvious differences in terms of their hearing, at least peripheral hearing. One of them will tell you, yes, it's going up, I'm very sure of that. And the other will tell you, no, it's going down. So it's not very impressive like that because, well, you're just telling me. But more recently, we found a way to bias you toward one direction or the other. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Just forget what I just said. I'll now play you a different example. So the different example is now there's a random melody and then a short silent break and then two tones and the same task. Up, doot, doot, or down, doot, doot. Okay? So I'll play you the first example. What do you think?
Still going up.
Yeah, still
Up.
going up.
All right. And now, second example. Same question.
Now it's going down.
All right.
Yeah.
And thanks to my spoiler, you probably have guessed that the two final tones are exactly the same. They're physically the same. They're the same acoustic waves reaching your ears. But simply by playing a little bit of context, I could bias your perception towards one interpretation or the other. So it's not very orthodox to say that, but I think it's still a form of memory, form of very rapid things changing in your brain, or prediction changing or something. That's for the same sound makes you interpret it in very, very different way.
And what exactly did you change in this context?
Okay, so the trick was to play on your expectations. So implicit expectations. One thing we know is happening when you're building streams. So you use the word. So Audition is in time. So it's really useful to be able to realize that if I say different words, there are gaps between them. They happen in time, but it's the same person speaking. If a violin plays a melody, all right, I don't want to figure out at each note, where is this coming from? It's the same object producing this. And this auditory scientists call that a stream. So something in time which kind of tends to group frequencies belonging to the same physical object out there in the world. So for our illusion, the final two tones, which can go up or down, are again ambiguous. There are as many cues to tell you it's going up, then it's going down. And by playing the context, we kind of create a stream, implicit stream. It's a bit different, but it's the core idea. And then, when then you encounter the ambiguous sounds, you feel, oh, the stream has just continued. And then this biases your perception. So for the amateur, the way we can model that is with some kind of a Bayesian model. So you create a prior of what different frequencies should be bound to what other frequencies. Initially, you have no idea, but then when you have this random melody, you create a strong prior that there is something happening here, and then this completely biases your perception for the ambiguous tone.
So basically what you're saying is there's long-term influences, but also very, very short-term
Absolutely.
influences that
Yeah,
happen over a few seconds.
Yeah. And the core problem is, as we said at the very beginning. So the problem we have is, if you're a mathematician, you would say it's ill-defined. So you observe one-dimensional vector. So it's just pressure, motion of your eardrum, everything, If you're in a room here, it's very quiet, but in any reasonable environment, you'll have many different things happening at once. It all projects to one number at any given moment in time. So there's no way you can write a set of equations to go back just with this information. So you have to add more stuff so you make sense of this highly projected source of information. And one way you can do that is through memory knowledge and also rapid knowledge. So if I'm sitting here with you in this room, I don't expect new voice completely different to just appear out of nowhere. So I kind of know what kind of things to expect on a short-term basis. And in fact, when you enter in a room, you don't know that, but the way you interpret speech depends on the room characteristics. So if it's very reverberant, the same acoustic stimulus will not be heard as the same phoneme compared to where it's a very dry environment. So you make these adjustments all the time.
So I wanted to go back on your example on hearing aids, because I think it's a nice transition with some real world application for your research. So you mentioned that most of the time what hearing aids do is compensate for a loss in threshold, but that cannot account for different type of hearing loss. So could you explain, maybe taking like the example you just gave of like a noisy environment, for instance, like a cocktail party, it's hard for hearing aids to just amplify the frequency, I guess, because it's how is it simply what they does, just amplifying the frequency?
Well, the early hearing aids would do that. It's very easy to, it's like a graphics equalizer on your whatever. I don't know if people still use them, but you can easily amplify some frequencies and not others. So that's technically straightforward, but unfortunately, this is not enough. And the key word here is it's our hearing sensor, if you want. So the cochlea is highly nonlinear. So if it were just linear, it would maybe just change the amplitudes of different frequencies. And then if you compensate for that, there you go. And this is, again, sorry for the vision sciences, but this is kind of what happens with glasses, It's an optics problem, mostly. If you correct the optics at the before the eye, then you can easily work out what you have to do, so the retina gets kind of a non-blurry picture. For the cochlea, it's completely different because it's highly nonlinear. It's not only a problem of gain; it's also a problem of being able to separate the different frequencies. And one thing that the most typical forms of hearing impairment do is alter this nonlinear process, which is crucial for you to be able to be very precise in separating the different frequencies. So just boosting the sound will make you hear the sound, but then everything will kind of get mixed together. And reverse engineering that is really hard and possibly impossible. It completely depends on the exact individual hearing loss you may have. And hearing aids have made a lot of progress. So now they're trying to work around these issues. So there are many different fancy processing schemes available. But it's still not, as you know, unfortunately, it's still not as easy as just, ordering a pair of prescription glasses. It's much more difficult to know exactly what your hearing loss is about and find a way to alleviate that. And it's not even provable that it's possible. Maybe it's impossible by changing the inputs that you'll get back to normal kind of hearing.
So just a completely naive question. When you have hearing loss, is it most of the time due to the cochlea, or can it be attributed to later processing?
So clearly the most prevalent forms are, if it's called sensorineural hearing loss, so we also have outer ear problems, so that's different. It's the cochlea. So the cochlea has this very intricate feedback loops to be highly sensitive, so it's really very much attuned to like the best things an engineer would be able to devise. This is basically at the limit. You're really sensitive to tiny amounts of displacement in the molecule of air. And the way this is achieved is by having a very fancy feedback loop, biomechanical feedback loop, which changes the way the sound information is encoded. And unfortunately, this deteriorates with age. So that's one very prevalent form of hearing loss. It's called presbycusis. So it's usually people start losing high frequency sensitivity, but it's not only that, it's also the selectivity. And then a lot of other sensory neural hearing losses are also due to this process. Not all of them, but the other types are also due to cochlear impairments most of the time.
Okay.
But then, it's not because it's peripheral, it's easy to to address. And this is what we've been finding out. So it's a complicated problem. A lot of progress has been made, and hopefully a lot of progress is to come.
And one thing I heard recently was that you're trying to make intelligent hearing aids where they can pick up what the person's trying to pay attention to, maybe with the help of some neural signals, some EEG recordings, where you put electrodes to capture actually the brain activity and use that to augment the streams that the person's interested in. So
Yes, so that's,
violent.
I think you're right. That's clearly one very promising way for future applications. If you only focus on the acoustic signal, I think the problem is really hard because, as you say, you don't know what the person wants to focus on. It's not clear how you'll correct the impaired transduction process in the cochlea. So what people are now trying to do is indeed use artificial intelligence, which is now able to a large extent. So it wasn't true a few years back, but now it is, to just from an acoustic mixture to kind of make out what the different components are, and maybe emphasize speech versus background noise, music versus other kinds of signals. So now you do have hearing aids with these like music mode, speech mode, and all that, which try to do that in real time, which is very promising and clearly an avenue for. This will come to probably most hearing devices in the future. But then you've got the problem of if the machine is going to decide what to select from the mixture, well, it's better match what you want to listen to. And then you have, you could imagine all kinds of interfaces. So an easy one is to have a look at where people look, because often they tend to look to the person talking to them, for instance. So that's one easy signal to collect. But you could also go all the way and try to pick up brain signals with, as you say, what we call EEG, so tiny electrical signals that you can collect on the scalp of people, completely non-invasive, but very, very noisy as well. But if you've got fancy signal processing, you could hope to know what the person wants to listen to and then amplify that through the AI signal processing in the hearing aid. Yeah.
Is then one of the projects that you're working on with some external companies? I know you're involved in many collaborations with industry, especially in like the hearing aid area. And so what are some of the things you've been working on, if you're ready to discuss?
So I should say that this project was really the neural steering of hearing aids in the lab was more done by Alain de Chevigné and Shihab Sharma. So they worked a lot on that. They continue working on that. My tiny involvement in that was with a former student, actually. With maybe it's a story I should tell, because it started from collaboration with an industrial partner. I'm not sure if I say the name of the company. Yeah. So it was Urgotech. So the French people will know Urgo because they make all kinds of parapharmaceutical things like plasters and things like that. But they also have a startup which is called Urgotech, and we worked with them on some unrelated projects. And it so happens that the founder of the company had some hearing impairments, and then he came to us and he said, "Well, why don't you make some hearing aid that just removes the noise and let me hear, because all the hearing aids I have are good, but I'm not satisfied with them." And we told them it's a great idea. It was in maybe more than 10 years ago. So we told him, yeah, it's great, but it's not possible. People have tried, we know all kinds of fancy signal processing algorithms, but it's impossible. They say, no, just do it. And I said, why not? I've got this nice and bright student, so let's try. And we did try to work on real-time denoising algorithms by using some deep nets, basically. The core idea was if you want to do that in real time, you can't have a lag, right? If I'm talking to you, the hearing aid thinks for 5 seconds, then you're doomed. You have 10 milliseconds max, which is not much. So one way to get around that is maybe to do a bit like the brain does, which is to predict what's going to come and to apply your denoising on your prediction. And this kind of, I was surprised it worked so well. It didn't really work, but I was surprised it worked so well. And the conclusion of the story is that the students Manuel Pariente went on to do a PhD at INRIA, so a lot of machine learning and all that. He founded this startup and is now working. So they've been bought by a big company to implement this kind of thing. So hopefully in the future you'll be able to denoise in real time the sounds coming to your ears. And what am I telling you all this? Well, that's an example of I think things you can be convinced to do if you have industrial partnerships that you wouldn't necessarily try yourself because the common opinion is it's too hard. But sometimes it's just worth a try. And now after a few years, I guess there's a whole field and many people doing that much better than we do. But yeah, that was a good idea.
Yeah, it sounds super cool, and it makes me want to try out this technology for myself, even if I haven't lost my hearing yet. So do you think it's possible to apply this to, let's say, musicians or DJs or any other domain of hearing where it's useful to augment certain things and manipulate it as you wish?
Yeah, so that's more, I guess, forward-looking. But for the moment, if we could help people with hearing loss go back to hearing they can again enjoy and not think about, that would be already amazing. Augmentation, sure. I mean, the same kind of tools are being used to, like if you have a complex track with many instruments, you can now kind of isolate different instruments, but that's more engineering than perception. So yeah, I guess you could have all kinds of ideas. One thing which may be more related to perception is, I guess, controlling the way you produce sounds. So you're a musician, so you know that it takes a long, long time to study an instrument. And then you get a feel of what's going to come out of it. And it's something which is, really enjoyable, but hard to access for people who haven't got musical training. So you could imagine finding ways to have controls of the sound people may want to produce if they want to have fun with sounds, which are kind of related to perceptual dimensions. So I guess that could be an idea.
Yeah, it seems like stuff has been moving so fast and changing so much. And I don't want to call you old, but
You just have.
you've been doing research for many, many years, and you have like this entire CV of interesting projects. And
Thank you.
maybe you're a good person to ask what are the biggest ways the field has changed since you started working on auditory research, and that can either be in terms of techniques or scientific questions or shifts in how we approach hearing. And how do you think the trends have changed the past few years?
Well, since we've had computers, I think. No, I think in terms of broad changes, I think it's the case that auditory science had been a bit insular in terms of, cognitive science and all that. It was there are historical reasons for this. So I wasn't there, but when the Bell Labs started to, build a telephone network in Northern America, they needed to find ways to cram as many voice signals as possible in a bit of copper. So they invested a lot in hearing sciences, and a lot of the early things. So there were other things before, but the field really got shaped, I think, with engineering questions. And also, if you want to understand the signal, it's much less intuitive than a picture for vision. So you need to know a bit about physics, acoustics. So hearing was perhaps more in the style of engineering for a long time. And then this has, I guess, changed now that there are more cognitive science departments all over the place. You get to interact with different fields, different disciplines. The questions have changed a bit. And of course, it would be crazy not to say that, but even if it's expected, yes, the fact that we now have artificial systems with machine learning that can do things which we thought were incomprehensible, this clearly changes things. So like all of the fields of inquiry, I guess, now that you have a huge matrix which does the kind of things you would like to explain in the brain, people have trying to find ways to compare the two, to probe the huge matrix in ways that tells you a bit about how sound is processed. So,
And if I could draw one last comparison with our friends, the vision scientists, there's been tons of money on computer vision and self-driving cars and all of this. And do you see auditory science as something that's as big as visual sciences? And
well, in terms of people involved, clearly no. But for us, the big drive has been the hearing aids industry. So it's a huge problem in terms of public health. So I think estimates are like 12% of the world population, at least in developed countries, I think, for which we have these studies, would require hearing aids. That's a huge amount of people. It will only increase as the population gets to live longer. And what we can do for them is already okay, but clearly there's a lot of improvement to be made. So this has been it's not like self-driving cars maybe, but this has clearly always had some impact on the field, and I've also been lucky to work with people in the hearing aids industries, and clearly there's a lot of demand and dialogue between the fundamental sciences and applied applications.
yeah, so as long as people keep going to rock concerts, we're in business.
Oh dear, yes. Yeah, another thing is that was also an early success of the auditory sciences were cochlear implants. So cochlear implants are neuroprostheses. So you're basically stimulating electrically your nervous system, which sounds like sci-fi, But in fact, it's been happening since the late 80s in hearing, and it's now a common device. So if you've got severe hearing loss and you choose to, you can get a device which will listen to your environment, produce electric pulses, and then make you hear again.
So does it replace the cochlear?
It kind of bypasses the transduction process and stimulates your auditory nerve. So it does not so far get you back to normal hearing, but some results have been impressive. So that there are also some ethical considerations here, which we may not want to address. But no, this is an impressive technique, and I'm mentioning this because I think the reason why this has happened so early, in fact, for hearing, is this kind of engineering bias the field had. So you had people who just started with a cochlea, spend their whole life on it, and then when people had the ambition to stimulate the peripheral system, we kind of had some principles to go by to do this kind of things. Yeah.
So I think what we can take away today is that the auditory system is very intricate and very cool, and we're all a little bit special, and our hearing profiles are really unique. And so thank you for coming very much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you for teaching us all about how we hear. This has been Cognitions, a cognitive science podcast, and we've been chatting with Daniel Pressnitzer from the ENS.
On the next episode of Cognitions, we'll chat with Mark Dybel about how much time people take for leisure. If you've ever wondered whether our contemporary living conditions are reducing leisure time, this is an episode that is not to be missed.